Well, they always called him President Peace Prize because Barack Obama, as you famously remember, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize pretty much before he became president. His simple election was going to bring about world peace just through the sheer magnanimity of his big, flashy smile. And during the 8 years that President Peace Prize was president, we saw the situation in North Korea continue to accelerate as North Korea got more and more nuclear weapons. We saw the deal with Iran, which was a running joke, simply fall apart. We saw mass murder, gas attacks, all kinds of things, in basically genocide in Syria. We saw our standing in the world relative to China and Russia completely collapse. We saw ISIS basically go from being the JV team to murdering people everywhere. And all of these are the results of the foreign policies of President Peace Prize. Now we discover that the vulgar, loud, did I say vulgar? Short-fingered vulgarian, the knuckle-dragging Cheeto Hitler, President Bad Hair, has, through some miracle, managed to get the presidents of North and South Korea to not only shake hands, but to embrace each other. And I don't think that's an accident. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott after the world's longest lead-in, and this is your right angle on the real President Peace Prize. Guys, I have an operational theory. I had this theory before this meeting of the two Korean presidents. I've had this theory since I started to read history. And my operational theory is this, is that even though Kim Jong-un came to power during the Obama administration, whatever years he spent with Obama as president, he never experienced one thing that he did experience with Donald Trump during his first year in office, and that was he got scared. Kim Jong-un got scared, I think, for the first time in his life. Because I think for the first time in his life, Kim Jong-un spoke to somebody who spoke his language, not the language we would like him to speak. Scott, I maintain that Donald Trump's openly avowed willingness to go to war with North Korea, which was not only mocked by the left, absolutely trumpeted as the end of the world, we're going to be nuked, it's all over, my God. These people never learn from history, do they, Scott? They never, ever learn, ever, that you simply have to stand up to bullies, and the more you basically, take a knee and the more that you pay the Dane Guild, the more the Dane returns.
Well, I think for years the Kim regime has been able to cruise along on its, frankly, sane and reasonable understanding of human nature. And,
I agree with this.
For years when they were saying that the various Kim, dynastic leaders were nuts, I would say, no, they're not nuts. They're completely rational and logical, and they know what we're going to do. And then suddenly along comes a president who Mr. Kim looks across the ocean and says, gee, I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, is he serious about this? Why is he calling me Rocket Man and Little Rocket Man? And I think that threw Kim off his game. And while I don't believe that Donald Trump has always used his negotiating tools as effectively as he possibly could while in office so far, in the case of the Korea situation, I think he absolutely has. And I've said it before. I think he has basically laid down a sort of, at the same time, a no-nonsense attitude toward we're not going to let that little rocket man push me around, and also a complete mockery, a Charlie Chaplin-esque mockery of Hitler, where we have, except Trump is mocking little rocket man. I think this is highly effective, and I think it gave the brushback pitch to the People's Republic of China, and they started thinking, hey, wait a minute, which horse are we going to bet on here? And to see that picture of Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un embracing, or at least coming as close to an embrace as the combination of Kim's short arms and broad belly allowed them to. I mean, that is absolutely world-rocking after 68 years of essentially hostilities that never ended. If anybody on the left is playing this down and trying to make it seem like, oh, well, things would have happened that way eventually anyway, no, they would not have. And President Donald Trump deserves a lot of the credit for establishing the atmosphere that allows this to come along. Now, we're all cautiously watching, okay, what does it really mean to denuclearize the peninsula? What does it really mean to actually end these hostilities, to put an end to the Korean War? I just stood by a gravesite and buried my Uncle Herb, who was one of many Americans who served bravely in Korea for a war that never seemed to end. It will be a tribute to his generation and, frankly, to this presidency if we see that end.
It's a war that never seemed to end, and way too often never seems to be remembered.
Yeah.
It's the missing war, with everybody's eyes on World War II and Vietnam. Steve, there has been criticism. You brought this up in our pre-show conference. There's been criticism that Donald Trump has negotiated with Kim Jong-un at all. There's criticism that we're lending prestige of the United States to this lunatic and so on. I think there are two things at stake here. I think Scott's exactly right. I think Kim Jong-un looked around and said, I think there's finally somebody in the world who's crazier than I am, and I don't know what to do.
There's something to be said for that, though.
But that's not Donald Trump being crazy. When your first act as president, was it the first day or the second day you dropped the biggest non-nuclear weapon that we have on ISIS? You are announcing to the world, boom. When you bring in Mattis as Secretary of Defense, you are saying to the world, no, these days are over. So how would you respond to people who say that we shouldn't be sitting down with Kim Jong-un? Because frankly, it seemed to me that Kim was between a rock and a hard place. He either caves into America, in which case he's probably going to be taken out by his own people. He has to be strong in front of his people to keep up that tyrannical, murderous regime of his. Or he goes to war with the United States, which also has a downside. There's actually a third side now, Steve. And that third side is Kim can be seen as the great peacemaker, as the man who broke the ice. He can be the great liberator. Is that worth the price, do you think?
I started looking at the Korea situation, I guess during the big famine of the late 90s is when I first started really getting interested in this. And I realized there's no easy solution to the North Korea problem for a couple of reasons. The first is that unlike most other little countries, North Korea has a major power sponsor in China that will do anything almost, until recently, to defend their nasty little ally. And excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. And the other is now the nuclear weapons situation. And you have to let's look at this from Kim's point of view. He watched what Obama and Clinton did to Muammar Gaddafi a few years ago. Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons program in no coincidence, I think, on the day Saddam Hussein was captured. He said, oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, I do have a nuclear weapons program back here. Let me get that for you. And the trade-off was supposed to be I give up my nukes and I don't find myself in a spider hole like Saddam. Well,
George Bush gets credit for that.
Yeah. And so then the Clintons went to war against Gaddafi, and Kim looked at that and said, wow, I'd better get nuclear weapons, and I'd better get them in a hurry, and I'd better get the missiles to deliver them with, because I'm not going to end up like Gaddafi, who the Obamas betrayed. Obama and the Clintons absolutely betrayed. So that's the situation. The other is this idea of his patron state in China. There is a really interesting bit of conjecture from it's either James Dunnigan, I think, or Austin Bay, but I think I found this at Strategy Page, where this turnaround really happened after Kim Jong-un's recent and, I believe, almost unprecedented trip to Beijing to meet with the Chinese president. And when I say this, I don't want to take away anything from President Trump, because he is the instigator. He is the prime mover behind this change. But apparently, or at least the conjecture is, Kim's nuclear weapons program was far enough along that China realized that if they ever needed to do anything with their nasty little ally, they'd better do it soon, because soon he was going to have enough nukes to defend himself from China and even hold his own major ally hostage. So he goes to China. China says, you've got a madman in the White House, and we're not getting you out of this one. Make peace, and we'll make sure it's a good peace for you. So does this mean reunification happens? Probably not in our lifetimes. I'm afraid North Korea is just a geopolitical fact, and the reasons for that are almost too horrible to contemplate. I'm talking about the starvation. I'm talking about the oppression. I'm talking about the being cut off from the entire rest of the world since 1950. So I don't think that is on the table anytime soon. But if we can get peace, if we can get real peace out of this situation, it will be such a blessing. And the people we really need to thank for this, number one, President Trump for making it clear that change was coming. And two, I hate to be praising this guy, but Chinese President Xi for laying down the line to North Korea too.
If you look at the history, not just of Kim Jong-un, but Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, you look at the entire history of the Kim regime, they've been playing a game in what's known in game theory as the Pinto strategy, the Pinto theory. And basically, this game theory idea works like this. If I'm driving a 40-year-old Pinto that's floor is rusted out, banged around like everything, windows cracked, the paint's peeling, and the car's worth $100. And I'm going to merge into a lane with somebody who's got a brand new $400,000 Maserati. If we both decide we want to merge into the lane, the Maserati's going to give way because he's got something to lose and I don't. And that is essentially the way they've been playing the entire world. They've basically been saying, oh, no, we will cause you some real pain. Sure, you can kill us and stuff, but we'll take Seoul with us or whatever the case may be. And Seoul is a $400,000 Maserati, and nobody wants to see that happen. So the guy in the creaky Pinto gets to do what he wants to do on the road. I think finally somebody came along. Maybe it's the idea that Donald Trump is driving a $400,000 Maserati with cracked windshields and rusted out floors or whatever the case may be. But he ran into somebody whose car's got enough dings on it for him to be able to say, I think this guy's actually I think we're going to actually have a collision here. This isn't news, you know. When Hitler made the decision to invade Poland, which actually began the World War II, he was surprised that the British actually went to war because he said, and this is a direct quote, I met Chamberlain and the French Prime Minister Daladier, I think. I met them in Munich, and they're just worms. They're little worms. And so the lunatic dictator who lives in his own little thought bubble went ahead and started the biggest catastrophe the world has ever seen. They knew that Winston Churchill was a threat, and they knew that when Winston Churchill became prime minister that they were in a fight for the duration of the war, or for as long as Winston Churchill was alive at the very minimum, because they knew that this guy was going to fight. And if he'd been prime minister, I don't think World War II would have happened. Was this a one-off? Well, in the 1980s, we saw Jimmy Carter basically doing the smart thing, the reasonable thing. The Iranians basically launch an act of war against the United States, overrun an embassy, take 52 hostages for 444 days?
That sounds right.
And Jimmy Carter sends them cakes and Bibles and negotiates with them and so on. And this is all that they want. They want the prestige, they want the attention, they want the money, they want all of this. A bunch of college students are now in an argument with the President of the United States and winning. And then Ronald Reagan gets elected, and then the hostages are released from Iran after 444 days, something like 4 or 5 hours before Ronald Reagan actually takes office. That's not a coincidence, ladies and gentlemen. It's not. It's not a coincidence. And I'll give you one final example. I was one of the people whose hair was on fire screaming that the world's about to end because I didn't understand this stuff. But when Ronald Reagan walked out on the Soviets in Reykjavik, after having 98% of the deal done, because he wouldn't give up Star Wars, I said this was our last chance for survival. I was a progressive. I knew I wasn't a progressive. I was never a progressive. I was more liberal than I am today. And since I didn't know anything about anything, I thought that's it. Now the war is going to start. That was our last chance to negotiate peace.
Yeah.
You can negotiate peace with Britain, and you can negotiate peace with South Korea, and you can negotiate peace with other people driving Maseratis who have something to lose. But what Ronald Reagan understood was this thing must be destroyed, and Reagan's entire theory of Star Wars was, well, why should we fight these people with tanks when we can fight them with dollars? We got a lot more dollars than they do, and they have more tanks than we do. This idea works. This idea works. You're kind to your enemies. You're cooperative with people who understand cooperation, but bullies and tyrants and murderers only understand one thing, and when it becomes clear that negotiation does not work with them in the beginning, and I mean like in 1953, then it's time to say, okay, you've made your decision, and now you're going to pay the consequences. If we'd done that in 1953. We would have been spared what Scott called, was it 68 years of misery for the Korean people and just general heartache around the world. Donald Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He'll never get it, of course, but to be honest with you, any organization that gives a prize to Barack Obama before he even takes office has diminished that prize to the degree where I think it's beneath Donald Trump to accept it. That'll do it for your Right Angle on Korea and the Real President Peace Prize, brought to you by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. We're here and we're immune to the forces of Facebook suppression and shadow banning and all the rest because of a small group of people that keep these messages coming. We're very grateful to those people, and we'd like to have you become one of them. Just head over to BillWhittle.com and click on one of the big, light, bright orange buttons. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.